Should you max your Minamoto in 2024 and beyond? Well, the short answer is heck yeah, Minamoto's actually still very strong. Of course, you're here for the details. How does he actually work? What are some of the best pairings, especially in the early game? And will he really be viable at all in the late game? Stick around in this video for all the things you need to know. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and I've been playing Rise of Kingdoms for actually 2,002 days. I don't know when I flipped over. Well, I guess I can see exactly when I flipped over to 2,000 days, but I hadn't noticed. So I've been playing for a dang long time, and I maxed Minamoto pretty early on, and the value has been insane. So in this video, I'm going to talk about who should be investing in Minamoto, where he's strong, and all the things you need to know. Cards, or timestamps rather, will be in the description, so you can jump to whatever part of the video you're really interested in. So if you just want the talents, use the timestamps, you can jump ahead. Now, Minamoto is different from many other commanders in the game because you actually can get a fully expertised version of him from VIP. And it is cheaper than any other legendary commander in the game to rush max. It'll run you somewhere around $200, I think less than that, to buy up the special crates that you need. And you need to be buying VIP crates through around VIP level 9. Now, you also need to be at VIP level 9 in order to have access to each of these different exclusive chests that you can purchase. But this is unequivocally the cheapest, most efficient legendary you can get in the game. And that's pretty cool. Okay, efficient and cheap is good as far as legendaries go, but is he any good and where is he good is assuredly the question you're asking. Now, I have maxed the overwhelming majority of commanders in this game as of the time of this recording, and this is on my main account. And the thing that's powerful about Minamoto is that he is going to be great in the early game and usable in the late game. And let me explain that a little bit more, all right? To do that, we need to review his skills, and then it'll be clear why it is that he will still be viable in the late game. So let's start with the active skill. The active skill does 1400 damage factor and has a 75% chance to deal additional damage. That's damage per second, 600 factor for the course of 2 seconds. So this is pretty cool. You're looking at a whopping 1400 damage factor plus 1200 damage factor. That's 2600 damage factor? That is nuts. Now, some of that damage takes place over time, and it won't happen every time. In fact, you have to be expertised in order to get that much damage. The base version of this skill is 1400 damage factor plus a 50% chance to deal that damage over time. So if we average that out, this is going to be 2000 damage factor on average. Once you get the additional percent chance to trigger this, you're looking at about 2300 damage factor on average. I know it doesn't actually work that way, but as far as early game commanders go with active skill damage, this is busted amounts of damage. From here, second skill gives you 10% march speed for calves and 20% attack. It ain't much, but we'll take it. Third skill, this gives you 50% more damage dealt to barbarians. This is peacekeeping related only. This is the skill you ultimately don't want to get if what you are going to do is battle other players. Fourth skill, and this is really the moneymaker, is that whenever this commander's troop launches a basic attack, that is when you directly target an enemy, you have a 10% chance to increase the damage received by the target by 30% for 3 seconds. This is a debuff onto the enemy. Every single thing hitting that target will do 30% more damage. That is insane. The cooldown on this is 5 seconds, however, so there is an internal cooldown before this can trigger again. So you can expect this just with some like napkin math, and this is not actually correct math, but like once every 15 seconds, you will get this to trigger. The way to think about it. But it is a powerful debuff that scales with the number of things hitting the target. And in the end game, when the heavy hitters are all swarming flags and cities and crazy things are happening, debuffs scale up quite nicely. Or if you're swarming a rally, for example. Again, this is endgame stuff. You're asking about Minamoto because you're in the early game, and you may not even have the funds or even know if you want to max Minamoto right away. So one alternative to maxing your Minamoto is to max just the first 2 skills, take them to 5, 5, 1, 1, all right? And what that will do for you is it gives you some nice damage on the active skill, and it gives you the march speed and cavalry attack, and that's all pretty good, okay? You can go in and actually lock skills. I can show you this on a commander perhaps that I am far from maxing. Here is Chandragupta. I have him mostly maxed. That won't work. Here we go. So you can use skill lock. Even if you unlock multiple skills here, you can push this little cog, all right? And if I locked it like this, now new skills would only go in the first two slots. Now they go in the first 3 slots only, so you could skip the 4th skill, and then this would apply them to all slots. So if you wanted to do 5-5-1-1, you'd do it like this. Of course, you should always max the first skill on a commander before you unlock and max the second skill. This is very important. I suppose these days, now that we have skill lock, you can unlock more skills, but just make sure you have skill lock set up when you deploy extra skill points. You really want to max the first skill. The active skill is better than all the skills on the commander. I mean, it is the number 1. All right, now, from here, why is Minamoto good in the end game? So end game commanders are going to be way better than early game commanders. It just is what it is. To even that out, what the developers have done in the end game is they have created a building called the Museum. You get access to this now, I believe, in KVK Season 3. KVK stands for Kingdom versus Kingdom. If you haven't even had your first Kingdom versus Kingdom yet, you're a ways away from KVK Season 3, all right? But once you get there, you get this really awesome building called the Museum. It's pretty much free to make, if I remember correctly, and you can basically unlock extra buffs on commanders. So you can see here, I have this relic on Minamoto, giving him an extra 60% of stats. And yes, that is exactly as big a deal as it sounds. 30% defense and 30% cav attack. This is what makes Minamoto comparable and relevant in the end game, all right? So you can use him in the early game for both PvE and PvP, and then you get to the late game, drop a double relic on him, and is he the best cav commander? No, he is not. But what's magical about a commander like Minamoto and making that investment is that it lets you focus on other commanders to build more marches. And that's really the beauty of it. Once you get to the end game, and as you work toward the end game, I will argue you should be building like 1 march of each troop type. 1 infantry, 1 cavalry, 1 archers. And like that way you're working on equipment. When you get to armaments, you can be working on your armaments for that as well. And you're working on those 3 marches. Well, this gives you one of the cavalry commanders that you need to have a good cavalry march. Once you get to the end game, you'll only need 1 other good cavalry commander, and you've got a good cavalry march. Minamoto's not the best, but he is good enough for endgame use, for sure, all right? Especially in most kingdoms, right? If you're in a top-tier endgame meta kingdom, you might get a little pushed around a little bit, but for most people in most kingdoms, he's going to do fantastic, all right? Now, just to give context on like, hey, what other commanders are out there for cavalry that are better, at this point, there are several. We've got Nevsky, who does even more damage and does crazy things when he is getting surrounded or is surrounding an enemy. You've got commanders like Huo, who should be near the top of my list here, who does some really insane single target damage, 2,700 damage factor, although he needs to be the primary commander and he's got some weird nuance to him, all right? In the end game, you've got another commander that is certainly better, and where is he? There he is. I just put up the filter for calves. William has a really cool effect on the 4th skill, giving everybody rage and defense on your team. It buffs 5 marches, which is pretty sweet. And then, of course, you've got Joan Prime. That's right. You've got Joan of Arc in the early game. In the late game, you get access to a new legendary called Joan Prime. And she does area of effect damage and generates rage and makes your troops deal more damage. Like, there are some powerful things that you can do. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend that Minamoto is the best in the end game. What I'm trying to show to you is that when you get to the end game, there are so many great commanders to work on to be able to have Minamoto locked in and then get his museum buff and just only have to pick one of these commanders and like, boom, you're off to the races with a cav march. That's legit. That's the value of having Minamoto. Now, he also is very good for PvE, and I use him every single day for rallying Barb forts. So if you're wondering, well, is he even still going to be good for the peacekeeping in the end game? The answer is also yes. So he's good for PvE. He's good for PvP. He does both of these things. Now, if we get a look at the talents that you might put onto your Minamoto, I'll give you 3 builds that you consider. One is a build that is versatile. You can use it for battling Barbs, and you can use it for battling Barb forts. The reason I'm saying you can use it for Barbs is you've taken Trophy Hunter, which generates extra resources whenever you kill a Barb. Trust me, over the life of the time you play this game, you are going to slay a lot of Barbs if you're getting your free-to-play value anyways. And that adds up so much over the lifetime of your playing this game. So yes, I use Trophy Hunter. I will periodically use Minamoto as a primary commander, running around smashing barbs. And just remember, only the talents of the primary commander matter when you're running around in the field. Also critical is, of course, you get Insight. This is going to reduce your AP cost, which means more barbs, which means more value. All right. So this is a general, barb smashing plus occasional barb fort rallying build. We get the 9% extra damage when you are rallying. All right. It ain't much, but it's something. All right. And of course, we take Rejuvenate to generate extra rage, and also Undying Fury to generate extra rage. Now, if you only cared about barb forts and you're like, yo, my boy Cheese, I need more damage on those forts. How do I get it? This would be the build I would steer you toward. It has less march speed, but still takes Insight. We get the extra damage to barb forts over here, and then we go all in on the skill tree. We also go and we take Naked Rage. You deal more skill damage and you take more skill damage, but you will deal way more skill damage than the barb fort is dealing. So there you go. The final build that I'd recommend is a field cavalry build. If you're doing PvP, this is the accepted build these days that every cav commander is using. Literally every cav commander is using. It is actually kind of nuts how much the community has flipped from being afraid of feral nature to embracing feral nature. And now the reason people are afraid of it is, did you know you can actually generate too much rage in a turn? I know that might sound a little weird, but there's a limit to the amount of rage per turn. It's 220. That is the maximum rage you can generate per turn. Okay. Now, when you start having abilities like Rejuvenate trigger on the same time as feral nature, plus you've got commanders buffing rage, you might be generating overrage, and you get no extra value from overrage. People were afraid of that, but now people have come to realize that it doesn't even matter. Some of the time you generate too much rage, but the times where you aren't generating too much rage, you're just getting extra, it's worth it, okay? This is the build that you use. Now, there is one thing you can tweak, which is that this talent over here makes it so you deal extra damage against archers. I like that. But this talent over here, Latent Power, pro tip, this is like one of the single most misunderstood talents in the game. Now let me explain it. Latent Power increases your damage dealt on damage over time effect. Let me just say it again because it's different than the wording that's here. Latent Power makes it so you deal 6% more damage when you deal damage over time. Now that does not apply to one-time damage. Again, it is only damage over time. So when we look at the active skill on Minamoto, this 1400 damage is not influenced because it's not damage over time. But this 600 damage factor per second over the next 2 seconds, that is damage over time. It is boosted by Latent Power. That is how the Latent Power talent works. Now, one thing you obviously will be wondering is, who do I pair Minamoto with, especially in the early game? Who should I use? Now, obviously, if you're looking at legendaries, you've got Double C in the early game. This is your premium Barb Fort Rally, Mina primary, Double C secondary. Don't use Double C as the primary, okay? I know he marches there faster, but then he kills it slower because his talents are designed for moving fast, not for slaying, all right? So I've made dedicated videos about how to make Double C move really quickly. Don't use Double C as the primary to rally the Barb Forts. Use your Minamoto. That's the way to go. I suppose the only reason you might not do that is if you use Minamoto with an open field build, and then you use Double C on a peacekeeping build, and you don't want to be changing your talents, which, like, in the early game, I totally understand that. In the late game, you'll have plenty of talent swaps saved up. That's not a problem, right? But the other legendary that you could pair with in the early game is actually not a cavalry commander. It's going to be Mehmed. It's a leadership commander. Minamoto Mehmed is actually very good. And I won't go into all the details of the Mehmed pairing now, but I'll simply say that it's decent skill damage and some nice buffs. Okay. Extra troop capacity is also kind of nice. So those two pair really well. And like, yeah, there are, of course, other commanders you could pair with. Like, you could do Caesar in there as a secondary. You could do Freddy in there as a secondary. But more likely, you're looking at epic commanders. And if you're looking at epic commanders, I'm going to tell you that Barbs is your #1 pick. Now, the reason that Barbs is your #1 pick is that he has area of effect damage. And not only is area of effect damage powerful, but most area of effect damage in the game diminishes in strength based on hitting multiple targets. There are very few commanders that do not diminish their damage based on hitting multiple targets. Barbs is one of them. Now, that doesn't seem like much until you realize, wait a minute, so for each target beyond the first, the damage drops 15% for most AoE? The answer is yes. Well, he doesn't have that drop at all. That's a part of what makes him strong. That's a part of the reason Ethelfled is very strong. I made a dedicated guide about her, covering that way in depth. You should check that out if you haven't already watched it. But Barbs is a really, really good pick, okay? I used to think that Pella was a really good pick here, but you're actually going to end up generating too much rage in a lot of situations. So that aspect of the Pella active skill ends up being not so exciting. Pella ends up working really, really well with Belly, strangely enough, because he doesn't have talents that are also generating rage. If I haven't already covered it in this video, I'll talk about rage capping and the secret rage limit at some point in the video, all right? So Barbs ends up being, in my opinion, your #1 pick at the epic tier to go in and pair with Mina. There are other commanders that you can use. For example, you could use Osman. I think it'd be fine. You get some pretty solid skill damage, right? You could use Belly. I'd use Belly as the secondary in that case. I suppose if you were smashing folks during the Mightiest Governor, you're not going to make any friends hitting resource nodes, but the mobility talent tree as a primary is a thing that you could go and do, all right? And if I remove my filter here for leadership and cavalry and we just smash it over to epic, we can now see the full range of epics. You've got Boudica. She's versatile. You could do it. Generates rage, does a little bit of a heal. I think it's pretty solid. You can't actually gain access to Diaochan anymore, so I guess I can't recommend that one. And I think that pretty much covers your early game cavalry choices, all right? Barbs #1 pick, and it's kind of by a long shot, all right? That's your best shot here for early game big damage cavalry. Now, if you're wondering what equipment to do, it's actually kind of funny because you have so many different choices. But the funny thing about cavalry is that you have this weird green set that like no other troop type has that is really busted good. The Vanguard Halberd plus the associated pants, they freaking slap, man. This 2-piece set, I still use it on my Barb Hunter. My Minamoto is still using that set. Okay, that's not to say that there isn't better stuff, but it's very good. Okay, from there, when we look at like, hey, what am I doing on the boots and the gloves? I mean, I think generally speaking, like, yeah, of course you can start with the green stuff. Actually, is there? I could have swore there was cav green stuff, but now I can't. I guess there's archer, cav attack. I mean, this is damage to Barbs. The damage to Barbs plus cav attack is kind of nice, but you'll ultimately end up upgrading to windswept. This will be where it's at for a while. March speed plus health, and you'll use this windswept stuff through the end game, believe it or not. Like, there's really no reason to disassemble it, unless I guess you're really, down on materials and you're going to fight in KVK with something else. But the windswept blue stuff ends up being really, really good. There are these bronze bracers, very good for battling Barb. And if I just go to my Minamoto, right, like I don't like to commit a lot of materials to non-combat equipment. And for me, PvE stuff is non-combat. So like just a low-key flex for a minute on the investments I've made on equipment, like you probably won't even recognize what most of this is, but it's a lot of shiny and it's pretty, it is pretty damn powerful. Don't get me started on why I have cav stuff on Ethelfled. Just watch the Ethelfled video, all right? So anyways, all that to say, on my Minamoto, my money where my mouth is, the pieces that I thought were so efficient that I won't dismantle them, I'll just keep them anyways, and I'll rally Barb forts. It's the green stuff. See? The green stuff as I was describing. There's the damage to Barbs. The windswept head and chest. I still kept that. And I did dismantle the green weapon, only because I had this VIP weapon that I'm using anyways. This VIP weapon's not even that good. 15% cav defense. It's like fine, but I have it, so I use it, right? God, this skill damage pendant, FML. I made this thing and it just sits on the bench. GG, baby. GG. Equipment doesn't unlock until like City Hall 16 or so, so you got some time before you get access to this, but you'll get equipment pretty quickly, and once you do, some of these greens and blues that I've talked about are definitely the way to go. Now, in terms of armaments, you will get to this point later on. You'll unlock something called the formation system. You don't need to worry about it for now. I've got a bunch of Barb damage dealt and mitigation, but I will argue that either the wedge formation for a boost to skill damage is kind of the way to go here, or if all you care about is hunting barbarians, then I suppose you could switch the formation to, I believe it's triple line for the march speed. And like you could do that, but I personally use wedge, and I get plenty of leftover armaments that have bonus stats for Barb damage. Slam all those onto Minamoto. All right. As far as endgame commander pairings go, let me just make a few recommendations for you. The first recommendation is to never use Minamoto as the primary in the endgame. It marks you as a noob. It just is what it is. People will recognize that that player doesn't know what the meta is or don't have the meta, and you will get focused faster than you can say focused. So if you're in the endgame, use either Nevsky primary, Mina secondary, Joan primary, that's Joan of Arc prime, with Mina secondary, all right? Search for cavalry here. There she is. Or you use Huo as the primary with Mina as the secondary. Now, perhaps by the time you're watching this video, there'll be a newer cavalry commander out. In fact, I expect there will be. So I would assume that that other cavalry commander plus Minamoto might be the very best that you could do. Now, if you've learned something new in this video, do me the honor of throwing a like on here and consider smashing the subscribe button. I have been making videos about this game for over 5 years now, which is a little bit crazy. And I'm probably this week going on a tear redoing the commander guides for the early game commanders. And if that's the sort of thing you're interested in, again, I think you'll get a ton of value, and I'll try to impart a bunch of wisdom as I go around other things you'll want to know about the game. So consider smashing that subscribe button. And again, Minamoto is a great investment. It's one of the early game investments that I strongly, strongly recommend for new players to do. In fact, I have an investment tier list that I update every month, pretty much. The only time I don't do an update is when I'm so right and so little has changed that it's like, hey, I got nothing new to say, okay? If I have something new to say, I'll release a new one. But if I don't, I just let it ride. Most recently, it's been 3 months where like, hey, nothing changed on my list. So I let it be. But if you want to see the most recent version of that list at the time of this recording, check the card in the end screen. Thank you again for subscribing to the channel to get more videos just like this one designed to help you get value and smash your enemies. Until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom. Leave any comments you have about Minamoto down below in the comments. I'd be happy to answer them.